So, how did you end up in Taiwan?
So my parents are career missionaries with the Christian Missionary Alliance. And so in 1990, I would have been 5 years old. We packed up and we moved overseas. And I lived there for basically most of my childhood, with a few years that we returned periodically back to Canada, just intermittently.
Wow. So, you weren't born there.
I wasn't born there, but moved there before I can really remember. So
Got it. And what year were you born in?
85.
Got it. So, your family were missionaries.
Yes.
Would you mind telling me a little bit more about that dynamic in Taiwan?
Yeah, so it's really changed over time. There's still a very small church population if you look at the percentages of religious interaction within Taiwan. It's still very, very small, but it's much more, um, there's much more exposure than there used to be because of the presence of Western culture now versus previously.
Mhm.
When we went in 1990, it was a completely foreign concept. There was a very, very small church present in Taiwan, but we estimated it was less than 1% were Protestant believers. There had been some Catholic um, missionaries and that had brought the Catholic Church to Taiwan previous, um, and that, but as Protestant missionaries, we were very much um, kind of in an era of being on our own and having to forge and figure that out, and work with a very small local church that had been planted in by previous missionaries as well.
Wow. Did you feel out of place there because of any religious differences or the language barrier?
I would say we very much felt that way when we were there at first. It was a very foreign concept in the 90s for people to come from Canada or the US to Taiwan. And especially, like, we were in Taichung City, which is a major city, but um, it was not a common thing at that time for there to be people coming to live in Taiwan for an extended period of time, outside of maybe an engineering project or very select few military locations coming in to do training or those types of things. And so, like, we were in a neighborhood, we were the only foreigners that the entire neighborhood had ever met. Everyone loved the fact that we were blonde haired kids in a sea of black. I remember we used to get mobbed when we used to try and go out to do different types of things. So we definitely felt like we were, I would use the word aliens in the sense of um, not in our home country. But over the years, it became home to us,
Mhm.
as a family, and I now look at it quite fondly. I don't feel like I was completely out of place there. I felt like the culture welcomed me in.
Yeah, that's great. What kind of neighborhood would you say that you grew up in? Like, how were the kids there?
So it was an uh, urban neighborhood. I would like, we were in the main floor of a apartment building that it exited out onto the street level. But there was I can't remember how many 10 stories or something above us. And that was just a normal building type of situation. The kids, by and large, played very similar in a lot of ways to what I would say we see here in I'm in Canada, so up in Canada, where they play sports or different games on the street. So we used to go out and participate. Language was a big struggle early with that, of course,
Mhm.
but a lot of them, the kids wanted to know why we were different or whatever, but they didn't. I didn't ever feel bullied, that I remember, or anything like that, for being the white kid on the block, which was a blessing. So, and as kids, you pick up. I mean, my brother was 3, I was 5. We picked up the language pretty quick to be able to do basic communication for that type of interaction with other kids.
That's really cool. Do you speak it well now?
I used to. I've been back in Canada since 2005. And so my Mandarin Chinese is quite rusty. But I was quite strong in conversational Mandarin. And if I'm given situations where I practice it, it does come back still.
Mm,
But the it's more in the long-term memory now, so it's a little bit more of a struggle to recall some of the language.
that makes sense. That's cool that you got that exposure very young, though.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for it.
Were there any games that you remember playing that were you really enjoyed?
Oh goodness. Back when I was quite young, I remember it was mostly like riding bikes, just playing in the dirt, that type of thing. Um, just trying to remember. We were fortunate in that we had a little courtyard in our that kind of went into our area because we were on the main floor, and so oftentimes the kids would congregate there. I don't recall any specific games that we would play, but it would have been um, just very simple stuff for playing with trucks in the dirt. I remember bugs was a big thing because there's just bugs everywhere in the tropics, and so playing with ants or beetles and stuff like that with the other kids and boys in the neighborhood. So
That sounds fun. Did you attend school there?
so I did attend school, but I was in the American school system at Morrison Christian Academy, which is they have a hub in Taichung and then satellite campuses in Taipei and Kaohsiung. So I was in that school system the whole time. So it was a little bit more removed from the culture for schooling. Um, but because we were working with the local church, we really pushed that our community was the neighborhood and not the expat community attached to the school.
Mm. Did your siblings or sibling attend the same school?
Yeah, so I have a younger brother and then a younger sister who was born in Taiwan, came along in 94, I think was. And so all of us went through the same school system, different schools as we moved around the country at different times, but same school system together, yes.
Did you spend a lot of time with your siblings and your family?
Yeah, so because of the being expats at that time, it was quite a close-knit family group. And so we did a lot of stuff together as a family and really looked to the immediate family for a lot of what you would sometimes get elsewhere in a North American context.
Mhm.
Grandparents, especially at that time, long distance phone calls were not cheap.
Oh, I'm
So we
sure.
might get one or two a year for really special occasions type of thing, but nothing too crazy in that sense. So the immediate family unit was really what we had for each other.
Mm. Did you have a close relationship with your parents?
I would say yes, quite close. I was very fortunate. My parents were quite loving and very focused on while working and being in Taiwan with a very specific purpose. They also knew that family was a really important value that they wanted to make sure that our needs were taken care of.
Mm. Were there any other values that they instilled in you that you would say you still value today?
There's lots of values that I would say have come from that. I think one of the big ones that I appreciated at that time was um, while they were there and they were the career missionaries, um, they always stressed that our family together were serving.
Mm.
And so it was never just, oh, this is mom and dad's job and I'm not attached to what they're doing. And so that helped both create the family unit and that, but it also gave us a focus on reaching out to the Taiwanese people and sharing the good news of Christ with them. And um, and through that, just it really impressed on us the importance of serving together, and not that we were separate from what they were doing in any way, shape, or form. I
Mhm.
also think by taking us over to Taiwan and not they didn't try and really shelter us from what we were being exposed to. And some parents, especially in today's culture, would kind of go, "Oh, well, you let your kids experience that? Like, how could you do that to them?" Because they didn't shelter us from those things, they used them as teaching situations, and we learned a lot, and we developed a lot of different things in a worldview that is quite different from what someone who would just be raised in one culture would experience, which I'm very grateful for, um, in just how I view culture and other people who are different than us now, right?
Right. And what do you think one of those specific views that you hold is, and how would you say that that differs from, let's say, some of the people that you met in Taiwan?
So the importance of our faith to us is a really, really big part,
Mm.
and I would say even of the relationships that we built there, it was only like 4 or 5% tops, that ever moved to even coming to church, let alone saying that they were going to become Christian. Um, and so there is a huge gap in that sense, because as Christians, our faith is just so central to who we are,
Mhm.
and I think part of the Christian faith is the idea that we it's so based on love and love for everyone, and it's different than maybe some of our North American view of what tolerance of all the different groups and that would be, but just that idea of each person is created, um, and has value in God's eyes, and so they have value to me, and that's something that I am really grateful for, and I would say was a very different um, worldview than a lot of people we encountered would have held, especially in the earlier years, um, in Taiwan, as they were still more of a closed off nation.
Yeah, it's very cool to hear that. So, were you involved in a church? Did you have a home church there?
Yeah, so we did a number of different church experiences over our time there. So the way um, our life worked was we did 4 years in Taiwan, and then we would come home to or back to Canada for 1 year, and then back abroad for 4 years. And that was kind of the cycle that the mission organization my parents were with had established. And so in that, usually at the end of 4 years, when we went back to Taiwan for the next term, we would be in a different church situation. So sometimes we were in an existing church, just serving alongside the existing pastoral staff for another missionary family or whatever. My parents did plant two separate churches, in one in Taipei and one in Taichung in their time when I was there with them. They've since gone on to do two more,
Wow.
more small house church style, um, and that. But we were always very, very involved. And I remember that more as a youth. Like I remember being very active with the youth group, both in outreach to other youth to try and get them to come and join us in youth group, and also just in participating in with the other youth doing things that teenagers would do, going to play basketball at the local courts or whatever it might be, type of thing. So
What do you feel like your role was in assisting your parents or in the youth group at that time?
I think we always saw it as there was people that didn't know about Jesus that needed to hear. And so for us, that was always the main stress. And so however that would come about, was how we would look to participate. And being a kid, I did not have the life requirements of an adult, where you have to pay bills or you have to do certain things and have responsibilities. And so that really freed me up to just kind of do however I wanted to do that. And so a lot of it for me was just relationship building with kids in the youth group. Like I said, we would go out and we'd play pickup basketball or whatever, and we'd find another group at the court, and we'd be like, hey, we're all hanging out doing XYZ at the church building down the street. You should come and check it out. It's a really good time or whatever like that. Um, and then when there were people that were coming in, trying to find ways to work our faith into talking about people. And a lot of times, especially early on, when it was weird for North Americans to be in Taiwan, it was, well, why are you here? It's a perfect segue into, well, we're here because we know about Jesus, and we feel like Jesus loves the Taiwanese people, but you haven't had a chance to hear about who he is or how he loves you. And then we kind of build a conversation out from there. And we found that most people were very open to a conversation. It was moving from the conversation to an actual commitment, because of some of the societal pressures and everything, made it quite difficult to do more from an evangelistic perspective.
Yeah. So it sounds like you made a lot of good relationships there. Have you stayed in contact with anyone?
There's a handful of people that I still have loose contact with. We'll follow each other on Facebook, and smile at each other's photos of kids and things as we've moved into new stages of life, um, from that side. Because my parents are still working over there, I still do have a connection that way to the country as well. And so that then connects me to some of the people that are there. They have continued to be in relationship with, as well, going on 30 years now. And then when I was, just after I finished high school, I joined a organization called Overseas Radio and Television, that did English teaching via radio and TV broadcasts and magazines.
Wow.
And they used that as a bridge to then do evangelistic Bible studies in English that people could come and learn from, but they would also hear about the Bible and stuff. And so I've kept more contact with some of the people within that organization, just because that was later on in my life, and some of those people have either taken interest in what's going on for us, or we just have similar interests that were aligned at that time that have continued, type of thing.
Hmm. So your parents have been missionaries for how long?
Since 1990, so 32 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was there a time in your life where you felt like the faith became your own, or have you felt like that at all times?
Um, I would say both. Um, the story in our family that everyone laughs at is my parents told us about becoming missionaries, and I was so excited that I got up in the airport as soon as we landed in Taiwan to sing Jesus Loves Me, because we were there to tell people about Jesus, and that was, as a 5-year-old, how I knew I could tell people about Jesus. And I think that faith has stayed strong from that age. Obviously, as I've matured, I've come to more understanding of what my faith actually means to me, and different experiences of that. I would say in my early teenage years, there was definitely a new sense of understanding of, okay, this is what it actually means to have been a sinner and to have that sin um, forgiven by Christ. And then I would say, probably in my early 20s, I went through a season of learning a lot more about being in actual relationship through like talking with the Holy Spirit and the Holy Spirit's role in relationship, that it wasn't just being a missionary family. We were very Jesus focused. And
Mhm.
so the Holy Spirit, kind of that side of my understanding of who God was, really came later. But even from the early age, I would say it's just kind of grown and developed and blossomed, and God's really journey with me. And I mean, there's been lots of setbacks along the way too, but I'm very blessed in that sense to have that kind of heritage. So I'm very grateful for it.
It's amazing. I know the feeling of having a strong Christian family. My parents work in the church. My dad has been a pastor, youth group leader, worship leader for much longer than I know. Uh, have there been challenges with you personally or with your family that you have seen God's faith to your family?
There's lots of things that I could highlight, I think, in that sense. One of the biggest in my life personally that's kind of come out of being a ministry family is ministry families, by and large, are not wealthy. And when I graduated from high school and came back to Canada, I came back on my own to go to university. I didn't have My parents didn't have a college fund set aside because they were scraping by on a ministry salary. I didn't
Mhm.
have grandparents that could really help me out, and so I had to put myself through school with whatever way I could figure out. So borrowing, through loans, scholarships, things like that. But God has just been provided in just so many amazing ways. And I know that even when we were on the field, that was the case. And I've heard some of those stories, but I don't remember a lot of the specifics. But since coming back, like, I've seen God provide vehicles. When I needed a vehicle, we sent out to the church saying, "Hey, this is my budget. I'm looking to try and buy a vehicle, but I don't have parents here who can help me kind of shop and figure out how to find a used vehicle. Is there anyone that could help us kind of work through that?" And someone stepping forward and saying, "Well, actually, I feel God's telling me to give you my second vehicle," or whatever. And having a vehicle that was worth way more than what my budget would have been able to be. Or having someone else step forward and say, "Hey, you know what, I want to take care of your and your wife's student loans, because I just see that you haven't had the same opportunities a lot of North American kids uh, might might have, and I believe that God really wants to use you guys, and I don't want to see you saddled by that debt." Um, and there's just been so many times where I've kind of looked at and gone, "God, I don't know how this is going to work. And I guess I'm just going to have to put my head down and work, and maybe forego that dream or whatever that I feel might have been even given from him." And he's turned around and surprised me and said, "Actually, no, you know what? I'm going to take care of this in a way that you wouldn't have even thought." And so for me personally, that's been one of the big God stories, for me and for my now family, with me and my wife and son. So
That's very powerful. Did you see yourself when you were younger working in a similar field as your parents, or did you have other future dreams?
I definitely saw similarities. I did go to Bible school out of finishing high school. I did 2 years at Columbia Bible College in Abbotsford, BC. But I also sensed that I wasn't called to necessarily be a pastor or a missionary, and so pursuing a full 4-year degree in ministry wasn't my calling. Um,
Mhm.
my dad, in our time in Taiwan, served as the field administrator, so that included all of the financial and leadership side of things. And I saw myself much more gifted and aligned in that skill set as well. Those are kind of where my gifts that God has given me lie. And so I decided to switch gears and pursue more of that side of things. So I've still followed it a lot in their footsteps. Prior to COVID, I was working in a church serving in a role that would equip other people to go out and do ministry, which is kind of where my passion is saying there's lots of people who have the ability to get out there. They just don't necessarily know how to do it or have the skills to do XYZ on the back end. So you know what, let me take care of the accounting, let me take care of these things, so that they are freed up to actually go out and do the ministry and not be pulled away from what God has put on their heart to do, to pursue those dreams.
Mhm. Well, that's really cool that you were using those gifts. To go back a little bit, some of your friends in Taiwan, did you spend a lot of time at their houses? And if you did, how was that experience?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we spent a lot of time at people's houses. Most of the expat community that we would have been friends with through school would have been like we were scattered pretty large over the city because it was one school for the entire city, which is larger than most of our North American cities. So it
Mhm.
wasn't like we lived in the neighborhood with all the people we were going to school or anything. We would go over to neighborhood kids' houses and play and stuff like that. Oftentimes our house became the a gathering spot because it was also used for small group ministries or church ministries. My parents did different classes like English or baking classes, different things at different times. And so the community often came to see our house as the gathering place. So that was that experience more that way. When I moved into high school, I was then moved into living in a dormitory in a separate city from my parents. My parents were stationed in Taipei at the time, and the school was in Taichung. So it was about a 3-hour bus ride. So I lived on campus in the dormitories there, and did about 4 weeks in the dorms, and then I would go home for a weekend or a holiday or whatever it might be. And then mom and dad would visit usually once or twice in that time period as well down to the school. So because we were living together with a whole group of people from the school, there wasn't a need to go to other people's houses because there was about 40 or 50 of us living on campus together at that time. So
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Were there any crazy foods that you tried there? Or did you have a favorite food that was specific to Taiwan?
I am not picky in the food department, so pretty much like any anything that they put in front of me, I was willing to try and eat. And so by and large, you name it in Chinese cuisine, which can be quite out there for a North American palate. I've had most of it. I enjoy. I'm not the biggest fan of things like sea cucumber or jellyfish, some of those types of things. But I'm definitely not going to turn my nose up at most things that are not common to a North American diet. Much like most Taiwanese youth, I grew up on boba, or bubble tea as it's known in North America. Before it was a thing here, that was kind of our common thing. So I quite enjoy that it's here, although I can't believe that we pay 4 or 5 times what it would cost to get in Taiwan for that. And that the biggest thing I miss being in Canada over Taiwan is the street food. Like everything is made in a night market stall or whatever, where they just have a little thing on the back of their truck and you pull up and you can get onion cake or deep fried this or whatever it might be. Chai tea, like it's all served off of the back of a truck in the night market. And I really miss those types of things. And the seafood. I live in Calgary right now, and so we're landlocked, and I don't get to have much for seafood. And being an island, Taiwan has seafood like crazy. So
I'm sure. What was the biggest culture shock to you?
when we first got there, it probably was just being the white person in a sea of Chinese, and just being so visibly different in a culture that was not used to having someone different there yet. And so like I said, I remember people grabbing at us and things like that, just because they wanted to touch blonde hair, because it was a completely foreign concept to them that you would have something other than black hair. And that so I think that's probably was the biggest culture shock. Having grown up in Taiwan, it was not as big of a culture shock as I saw my parents go through at times. When we would go back and forth, like after being there for 4 years and then coming home back to Canada for a year, the return, you go through another culture shock when you get back, and you have to kind of be like, oh yeah, this is what it's like. For me as a kid, it was not nearly as dramatic as what my parents experienced, having to kind of reorient themselves to a culture in that sense. I think the community aspect of Taiwanese culture is very different than Canadian. We're much more individualistic versus a community um, type based society in Taiwan. So that was a pretty major difference for us to have to kind of learn and be open to. But also something that personally I really welcome. I'm much more interested in being in other people's lives and having them be a part of my life than kind of just plodding away and doing my own thing and pursuing my own path.
Mhm. If you could go back, what advice would you give your younger self?
I really don't have much for regrets from my time in Taiwan. It was a really, really good experience. When you talk to missionary kids, some missionary kids have very, very difficult experiences on the mission field. That was not my story. And so I don't know if there's too much that I would say that I could give myself for advice as to how to do things differently. Um, the advice, and I think I did a pretty decent job of it, would really just be to embrace it. And like, I have a deep love for Taiwan and Taiwanese culture. I think it's a really beautiful thing, and so I think I would just really encourage myself to embrace that. Maybe have some extra street food because it's so hard to get here, um, and that and whatnot. Um, from a faith perspective, I probably would challenge myself to be more bold in sharing my faith with people, just because at when I was younger, I didn't necessarily have a full understanding of just what it meant to be lost, and that could have been those people's only exposure to the church, just because it's still such a largely unchurched nation. Um, and that, so I think maybe something from that side, I would say, yeah, I would challenge myself to be like, hey, you're going to be David's only time that he hears the gospel, um, and that, so make sure you actually step out of your comfort zone a little bit more and be willing to do that and share the personalness of it, um, as opposed to just the generic evangelistic um, story that we sometimes get caught up into.
Mhm. And what do you think was one of the more important lessons you learned from their culture? Something that you took away from it?
I would definitely say the acceptance. It wasn't necessarily fully modeled to me, but having grown up in a culture and being an outsider in a culture like that, and having people being willing to accept me, even if that did take some time, has really taught me to accept and see the value of others who are different from me, who may have very different views from you. God doesn't love someone less because they're a Buddhist, even though that's very, very different than what we believe as Christians. And I think just having grown up over there, that really helped me to learn and develop that understanding, and to see the beauty in people who are different from me, um, in a Canadian, as a white Canadian or whatever, in today's world, and in a very different way than I think is preached to us by our culture of needing to be tolerant of other people who are different. It's much more of a biblical understanding of like God has created these people with way more value than we can ever give to them. It's not just that we're all created equal or anything like that. It's that God loves all of us and how important that is, and the value that He gives on to each of them, and to then develop that love for them. And I don't think I would have that in the same way had I not grown up in Taiwan. So to me, that I think would be my answer. Is it's not necessarily a pure Taiwanese value, but definitely something that has come from my experience in Taiwan.
So my last question would just be, what was your favorite part about the experience?
I think I would say my favorite part was being there, and being there more than just a visit. Like, it's really fun to go and visit another culture and get to experience it. I remember going and visiting friends who are serving in Spain, and getting to experience Spanish culture is very different from what we have here. But the trip was 2 weeks. And so it was very, like, you don't experience it in the same way. And getting to actually live there and become a part of the fabric of life there, and see it from that perspective, was very, very valuable to me, and something that I'm just, it was by far the best part, was getting to actually be there for such a long extended period of time. Because, like, for me, it was 14 years that I got to be in Taiwan. My parents have been much longer, obviously, since I've come back, but yeah, just that sense of being a part of something, is something that was huge for me, and has impacted me, and even how I now interact in teaching my son about the world and things like that. So
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I don't think I have anything else to ask you. If you have any questions, go ahead and shoot, but I don't need to take up much more of your time.
yeah, no, it's been my pleasure. If there's further things that come up that as you're going through, and if I didn't answer something fully or whatever, do feel free to drop me a message or whatever. I'd be happy to flesh something out further if you need, or anything like that.